This is a download from BFM 89.9, the business station.
BFM 89.9. Welcome back. You're listening to The Morning Run. It's 8:35 in the morning on Wednesday. No, it's Tuesday the 3rd of August. But for now, we're turning our attention across the South China Sea to Sarawak. Now, last Friday, the Yang di-Pertuan Agong announced that the state of emergency will be extended in Sarawak until February 2022 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This means that state elections will not be held until the emergency is lifted.
Now, to recap, the Sarawak State Assembly was supposed to have been dissolved on June 7th, but this was suspended due to the nationwide state of emergency that took effect from January 12th. The state elections, however, must be held within 60 days once the state of emergency lapses. So Sarawak political leaders across both sides of the aisle have largely supported the extension. Ironically, even while Sarawak remains in a state of emergency, the government has announced that it will progress to Phase 3 of the National Recovery Plan tomorrow, which is August 4th. This is despite the fact that COVID-19 cases are on the rise in the state, with over 400 new cases recorded yesterday. So what are the implications of the delay in state elections for Sarawak?
And joining us on the line to discuss this issue as well as other political developments is Dr. James Chin, Professor of Asian Studies at the University of Tasmania and longtime political commentator. Good morning, James. Always good to have you. So looking at Sarawak, there's bipartisan consensus that the emergency should be extended until the COVID-19 situation is controlled. That said, are there any implications of this extension that could be a cause for concern in your view?
So my take is that I think the political class as well as the overwhelming majority of Sarawakians do support the extension. I think what is at the back of everybody's mind is what happened in Sabah. As you recall, there was a state election in Sabah in September last year, and that triggered a nationwide surge in COVID cases. So people do realize that during elections, a lot of people move in and out, and it is not possible to control COVID-19 if you have this huge number of people running around all over the state. So I think there's widespread support for this extension. And I also think that this extension, for various reasons, both the government and the opposition need a bit more time to prepare for the state election.
Now, in terms of shoring up political support, who benefits the most from the delay in state elections?
I think it evens out on both sides. So on the government side, obviously, they will benefit in terms of delaying the election for the simple reason that if they can get the vaccination process completed, herd immunity by end of this year, plus if the economy recovers a little bit at the end of this year, and if election is held after February next year, they can claim credit. On the opposition side, as many of you know, they're highly divided, so this will give them an additional 6 months to come to some sort of agreement. If the opposition is not united against GPS, it is quite clear that GPS will simply steamroll over the opposition. So both sides benefit from this extension.
So I'm curious, James, what do you think each side will be doing over the next 6 months to prepare for state polls?
Well, I think there's not much they can do in terms of outreach because of the restrictions in movement. They really can't do much. But it will allow them, for example, among the leaders, it will allow them to think carefully in terms of candidate selection. You also allow them to plan in a more detailed way what sort of campaign they'll be running, the sort of different scenarios, and also most importantly for the opposition, whether they can come together to some sort of a deal so it'll be mostly a one-to-one fight with GPS. I think that is really crucial.
And what do you think these elections will be fought on? What are the key issues that Sarawakians will be focused on?
Normally, in terms of Sarawak elections, because Sarawak is the only state that does not tie its election to a federal election, most of it will be local issues. So I expect things like how well the government handled the COVID-19 issues, the vaccination issue, the state of the Sarawak economy, the disunity of the opposition, and of course the leadership of Abang Jo. This is the first state election that Abang Jo will be heading the GPS. So a lot of people will be looking or scrutinizing his record as chief minister.
James, you mentioned the Sabah elections earlier, and I'm just wondering whether there's any talk about reforms to the voting process that would maybe allow for more postal ballots, for example, something that would be able to mitigate a pandemic-like situation if in 6 months the elections are held.
Not really. you have to remember, postal votes is something in Malaysia that's often associated with service personnel, police, army, and that sort of thing. And we really don't have a real postal vote system. Even though it's called a postal vote system, the overwhelming majority of the postal votes is actually held in person. So what happens is that the EC will send people to the army camps, and the soldiers actually line up, or the police line up, to do the so-called postal voting. So it is not like the postal votings you find in other countries where you receive the votes in the mail and then you mail it in. In the Malaysian case, most of the postal votes are actually in person. It's just that you tend to vote earlier, and the votes will only be counted during election time.
And James, let's align it to the federal situation, because Perikatan Nasional seems to be in a pretty tenuous position in light of recent developments. How does Sarawak politics factor into what happens at the federal level now?
I think Sarawak politics play a crucial role. It is quite clear, even from February last year, when Muhyiddin cobbled together the PN coalition. Without the support of the 18 MPs from GPS, Muhyiddin would not have a slight majority. So they play a crucial role. That's the reason why you find so many Sarawak ministers in the federal government. But in terms of this current crisis, my take is that leaders from Sarawak, especially GPS, although in public they say they're supporting Muhyiddin, my reading is that like all leaders from Sabah and Sarawak, they look at which way the wind is blowing. Basically, politicians from Sabah and Sarawak want to be part of the federal government because they know that in terms of federal state issue, it's easier if you're on the same side. But much more importantly, they want to get extra developmental funding from the federal government. So they don't have any loyalties to either side. At the present moment, they're standing with Muhyiddin simply because he is the incumbent prime minister.
So, James, at the end of the day, are you saying that there is a possibility that GPS might switch alliances?
Yes, but you have to understand it is the context of going with the winners. So, in other words, they will not take part in the what they call it, in the overthrow the Muhyiddin administration. All this will be done on the Malayan side. All the movements will be done on the Malayan side. But once a new government is formed, they will try to be part or an ally of the new government. I suspect they will not join any formal coalition, but they will just attach themselves like what they're doing now, an ally of the federal government.
And speaking of where the wind is blowing, I mean, yesterday we saw opposition MPs blocked from marching to Parliament, and it was a united showing with all major figures present. Do you see the opposition rallying around Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim as the Prime Minister candidate, as he claims?
I think it's too early. There's all sorts of rumors being spread on social media. But the reality is that social media does not decide who the next prime minister is. It's the 220 MPs and maybe about a dozen warlords who will decide how these MPs vote. And these are the people who will decide. I would actually suggest to your listeners to stay away from social media, because the sort of rumors that's being spread around is really quite incredible. And a lot of it is just plain fake news.
Well, shifting to a place where there are many warlords, UMNO will be holding a Supreme Council meeting today to discuss the current situation. What do you anticipate? Could we see a breakaway faction supporting the opposition, or will factions remain loyal to Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin?
UMNO is already split. We all know UMNO is already split. The thing is that it's highly unlikely that right now, I mean, I'm talking the situation now, it's highly unlikely that there will be a faction that will be pulling out. Because all the scenarios, all the realistic scenarios, if you look at it carefully, right, if the government falls, UMNO will benefit. If the government stays on, UMNO will benefit as well. So I think it's very likely that within UMNO itself, they will feel much more confident. The thing that really worries me is really that it looks like the court cluster, they're getting more powerful by the day. So one of the interesting things that's happening in UMNO is that one of the thought leaders in UMNO that's becoming very prominent or making a big comeback is Najib. So don't be surprised if once the dust is settled, the court cluster will suddenly be the beneficiary of the current crisis.
So, James, at the end of the day, does it mean it's status quo? Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin will remain Prime Minister of Malaysia despite the rather public rebuke by the royalty, by the Agong?
We don't know. All we know is that things are moving very, very fast. The political class itself, I think, is still divided on this issue. But what I can say quite clearly, and I'm sticking my head out, is that I think the thought on social media asking the king to intervene, I think that is an extremely bad thing for Malaysia. Because the thing about political stuff is that everything is based on precedence. If you allow the king to intervene in a situation like this, then there's nothing to stop the king in the future for intervening in another political crisis. We have to realize that this political crisis is manufactured by the political class, and they have to resolve it. I think bringing in royalty is always a mistake. Malaysia, at the end of the day, is a constitutional monarchy. The monarchy is there to serve a specific function, and that function is a non-political function. So if you ask them to intervene in the political process, then in the future, what you're saying is that if we have another political crisis, therefore we turn to the king. And I think that will be a major mistake. Very often the problem with Malaysians is that they don't think deeply. They just want to resolve things in an instant. It's like the instant Maggie mee. They want an instant solution. Unfortunately, if you go for instant solution, there are political consequences in the future. So I would caution Malaysians against asking the king to intervene. This is a really bad thing for the future.
And on that note, James, thanks so much for your insights as always. That was Dr. James Chin, Professor of Asian Studies at the University of Tasmania, talking to us about the political developments that we're seeing and the kinds of implications that could come around depending on which path we choose.
Yeah, and exhorting us to have a digital detox, right, and not be over-reliant on social media for all your news and using it to really drive things that could have long-term implications as well.
That's right.
Because I think it's true. We are a country set by precedent.
Yep.
So it's important whatever decisions we make, whatever choices that could lead to our future. But I think he brought us some interesting points about the Sarawak elections. The issues that are impacting Sarawakans remain very much localized. So it's things like their development budget, how they're overcoming the COVID-19 crisis, the rate of the vaccination. So those are the key points that Sarawakans look at. And he also pointed out that GPS will not formally join any alliance, right? And they are very much keen on staying in federal government and then you can see that they have so many ministers at the moment.
Stay tuned, BFM 89.9.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To find more great interviews, go to bfm.my or find us on iTunes. BFM 89.9, the business station.